You're listening to the Raccoon Roundtable podcast, episode number 66. I'm your host, David Oria, and I'm here with my co-host,
Chris Sagana, and our guest today was our very own Rachelle Ibanez. Rachel is from our social media team, but she is also a co-founder of Cadiz Kitchen, which she founded with her husband, David Cadiz. But we had an awesome conversation about just learning our family history, especially since we're still in Filipino American History Month. We thought it'd be important to talk about, our family history and understanding and having the conversations with not just our parents, but, our grandparents about how they came to America and just what their background is. What do you think, David?
Yeah, man, I think just having this conversation, I know that after it, I was just like, I felt just like the pull to just have more of these conversations with my parents, with my grandparents, just to like understand where we come from, where our roots are. And I thought it was just super valuable, and I hope you guys think that too.
For sure.
So we have a very, very special guest for you guys today. Keeping it within the Raccoon Rounds family today, which is always awesome. And I think, honestly, Chris, we need this more, highlight the people that are, super integral into this entire platform. And today we have someone near and dear to us. You've heard her voice before, and now you'll see her on the podcast as well, if you're watching on YouTube or whatnot. We want to, or we'll let you introduce yourself, kind of give us a little bit of background. I know people probably have heard about it before, but go ahead, Rachel, take it away.
All right. Well, this is a new time in my life. I'm Rachel. When I first did the podcast episode a long time ago, I was just in my first year of OTD school, and now I'm in my final year. So there's a lot has changed. I got married. So yeah, that's a big stepping stone in my life. But yeah, I'm vibing. I'm here.
She always vibing.
I even changed roles on the Raccoon Rounds. I help a lot with social media. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the posts that you guys see, I probably collaborated on that. But yeah, that's just about me.
In that first episode, were you in Washington still, or are you in Vegas?
No, I was in Vegas.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I've moved several times after that too. So.
Yeah, and you're pretty much done with your program already, right?
Mm-hmm. Just in the stretch towards the end. Yeah.
Nice.
Less than a year left.
And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So it's been like 2 years since the last one of the first episodes.
Yeah.
Wow.
When we shot the first episode, it was like in the midst of the pandemic. So we didn't even have a vaccine yet.
Jeez.
I was locked in my room. It was a whole different time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
That is crazy.
Changes. I wouldn't say changes with you, but I mean changes with Raccoon Rounds and kind of the direction we're going in and what we, want to share with the world. Which is why we especially wanted to invite you today, because you have some stories to tell, some experiences to share, especially with your family. We want to talk about the importance of talking, with your family members, especially those who immigrated here to the States. So if it's okay, we can jump right into it. I mean, I guess what have you experienced?
So there's kind of two stories I have. Like, one is from my grandparents. So my mom was actually born and raised here in the United States, and that was because her parents migrated to the U.S. What's crazy is my great grandpa fought in World War II.
Wow.
So obviously I didn't really know much about him, and my grandpa passed away a while ago, so he didn't really talk about him as much. But after the war, because during that time the Philippines and the United States were working together during that war, so afterwards they gave a lot of the Filipinos an opportunity to come to the U.S. And so my grandpa and his brother kind of jumped on that opportunity and came to the United States like in the 60s. And so my grandpa came on a boat, which is crazy. And it took like a month for him to get here. And I can never imagine doing that now. But yeah, so when he first came to the United States, he actually worked as a fisherman. So he was going between California, Washington, Alaska, and that's how he kind of ended up in Washington, and he stayed there ever since. And then back then too, my grandma was saying it was so much easier for them to get petitioned to the US. So she's so cute. She said the one question she failed on her like interview to come to the US was how many stars were on the American flag. She didn't know, but they were like, that's fine, you can come to the US. But she was pregnant, and it was like one of the first planes like that they had created or like built that she like flew on.
Oh,
and if I
Wow.
ever
That's
had
awesome.
to fly on one of the first planes ever built, heck no. But yeah, it was really crazy. And she would tell me, like, recently I kind of like tried talking to her more about it, and I only recently found out she didn't even finish high school. So when she came here, she was like, yeah, I didn't like finish my high school degree, but like she found a job like at a sewing factory. And yeah, and it's just crazy how different of a time she lived, but it, you know, like just it's only just 1 or 2 generations after where I'm standing right now. So that's a little bit different because my dad came in the 90s, and he had already finished college. He was a dentist, but when he came to the US, there were like this kind of stigma that like outside education was not as up to par as the United States. And so he wasn't able to fulfill his career here. So he basically just started all over. And same thing, he started in California and then made his way up to Washington, and that's where he is. But it's just crazy to think about, like, you know, all the sacrifices that my dad and my grandparents did just to come here. So I'm very privileged to have had the opportunity to be here, you know, and be first-ish generation Filipino American.
Dang, that's awesome. That's like, I mean, two very, very like contrasting stories, and like how people like ended up here. And it's just so unique whenever you like hear about that. And I know, and actually you mentioned that, you know, your dad was a dentist back in the Philippines, and I still think even now that still tends to be a problem. Not I want to say a problem, but like a barrier. You know, the perspective of education in other countries. So I mean, I know a lot of people are also like dealing with that now too, but you know, I wanted just to ask, you know, like what did you learn from talking to them?
When I was younger, I was like, oh, here we go, you know, because when you're young, you're just like if I would get in trouble, for example, my dad was like, I came to America for blah blah blah, right? And so you kind of like brush it off a little bit, and you're just like, yeah, whatever. But it wasn't even like through my career, right? Like I'm stereotypical. I pursued healthcare like as any other like Filipino parent would want for their kid. But it wasn't until more recently where I was like, I'm doing this for a purpose that's bigger than just myself. I'm like the first person in my family to get higher education. You know, like yeah, I understand my dad did, you know, become a dentist in the Philippines, but the requirements back then are different from they are now. And so I feel like what I'm doing now in terms of my career, it's like I'm not just holding myself, I'm also taking everything that my family did for just a life here and trying to utilize it as much as I can to show them that it was worth it. You know, that's that. And that honestly didn't come until like just recently, where I figured like this is more than just about me. And I think like the more people ask me like, why did you choose like occupational therapy, you know, my answer is very like, you know, I just want to help people. But like once I started to dive down deep into like, okay, why is this so important to me? Like, you know, David, my husband, always is like, you're so passionate, you're so driven. But you know, and I never realized that until I understood why I'm doing what I'm actually doing. And it's not just for myself, it's for my family. It's like an achievement for my family to know that like everything that they wanted for themselves that they couldn't have, I'm trying to show them that they were able to make it, and I'm going to be the one to like show them that it's possible. And I say that because, you know, being Filipino American, it's really hard. Like you have to prove something to everyone, like either consciously or subconsciously. You know, like people have like this perception of you before you even get to express who you are as a person. And I realized that through school, is that I have to always push like 3 or 4 times harder than other people just to prove that I am just as good as them, with or without the color of my skin, or with or without my background. You know what I mean? Sorry, I rambled a lot, but
No, can I ask a follow-up? I
sure.
like you mentioned that this kind of like self-reflection only happened like recently.
Right.
I'm just curious, like, what was or can you point to like one thing, or can you point to like a specific conversation or a series of conversations that kind of flipped the switch for you? Like why now, did you start realizing that or feeling that way?
Well, I'll tell you like where it started. Like
Yeah.
I remember when I did not appreciate identifying as a Filipino. There was a time in my life when I was in high school where like I would get picked on a lot, like teenagers are stupid and they're really mean at that age. But I would get picked on a lot of like my culture and who I was, to the point where I was kind of ashamed of it, where I wouldn't say I'm Filipino American. I'd say I'm American Filipino. Like I'm born, like I was tired of having to justify that I was born and raised in America, that I can speak English very clearly, that I hid my identity for a very long time. But in more recent events, I think because now I have parents like telling me like, oh, like people like I'm kind of close to, or like kind of in my circle, are like, wow, I'm like really proud of you, and like I want my kids to kind of like look up to you in terms of their education. Like that's when it really started hitting me that there's other younger Filipino American kids that are looking at me and realizing this is something I can pursue. Because when I was growing up, there wasn't many. I've only met one other Filipino occupational therapist. And even when I've worked in the healthcare industry, yeah, there's like a lot of Filipino nurses, but where I'm from in Washington, there was not many. There was not a lot of people that look like me. So I think that's when the turning point was for me, was to other people, it was such a big deal. And for me, I was like, I'm just trying to pursue my career. But it was such a big deal to other people, and such a big deal to my family. And I couldn't just like sweep that under the rug, because they're the reason why they push me so hard is not for no reason, right? Our parents like have endured through so much. I felt like if that's what it took for them to do what they wanted to do, because like coming to the US was their dream, then I'm gonna fulfill my dream to show them that, yeah, you can achieve this quote quote like American dream, or whatever they thought it was. And so I think that's my reason for why I still kind of push through it. There are like systemic issues in United States education, but I'm very fortunate. I feel very glad that I have the support of my family to like pursue higher education. And so like I want to do as much as I can to maximize the privilege that I have, because it wasn't easy for them. And so I don't want to, I try to take this as a very humbling experience that I get to have, because I'm the first in my family to be able to do this, to have a choice, it's crazy to think about it that way. So
that's cool.
Man, that's awesome that you shared that story. It's crazy that you say that too, because I feel like I had such a similar experience where I had this issue with identity. And even though I was around a good number of Filipino Americans in high school, I was still would say, like you said, I'm American Filipino, because I know more things. I associate more with of the American side of myself.
Right.
And those two I saw that looked like me, I didn't have much in common, and I felt like I was on the outside looking in. And I think that made me kind of feel some kind of I don't want to say like resentment, I guess, so that it wasn't until like I moved back to the States and I started being more around a bigger diverse population of Filipino Americans who I could, get along with, and I understood, oh, like these people like what I like and stuff like that. And I guess my question for you would be just going on how you were eventually able to appreciate kind of when your parents would tell you stories about what they had to go through and persevere. Like what, I know that your mind shifted as far as the importance of it, but when could you really truly appreciate what they went through? You know what I mean? Because as kids, we're just like, okay, I get it. You had a hard time. For me, I asked that question because for me, I think I really started to appreciate it when I went and took like ethnic study classes. And I saw that it wasn't just my parents' story. It was so many other immigrant story. Like all of our stories are the same. So what was it for you?
I think it's really hard because there's a lot, like in more recent times too, like there's so many other, I guess I saw a lot of other Filipino Americans being very true to themselves and displaying that on social media, right? Like now we have like influences like Joe Coy, or like we just did a podcast with Ginger, the owner of Cafe 86. There's so many Filipinos that are so proud of who they were, and I remember growing up, I'm like, why are you like so proud of it, because I had that same resentment, because when you have one parent that's from the Philippines and doesn't understand the culture, and then you have one that does, you feel like you're in between a rock and a hard place, because it's like a lot of my life I was trying to teach my dad how to be American, but then at the same time, like I had my mom's like influence where she was like, no, I understand what you're going through because I went through the same thing, and it's really hard. But I think just the more that I saw people being comfortable in who they were, I think that was more of the turning point. It wasn't like a very specific, like I didn't have like an epiphany and have a conversation with someone. It was just like collectively where I'd be where I'd kind of notice it. And I don't know if it's more because like after Dave and I got married too, where we like sat down and talked about it, where we realized that we cannot share the language and the culture in the same way that our parents have shared the culture and language with us. And so I think that's where I really started to dive in, like, okay, who am I and what's important to me as part of my culture? Because even if we all grew up with a similar culture, we still all grew up pretty differently. Like my mom does not make adobo the same way your mom does.
True.
But you're gonna preach that your mom's is best ever, right?
Yes.
You're all gonna say our mom's is the best.
You have to.
So, and that's what I wanted. I realized, I'm like, dang, like when I have kids, I want them to be like, my mom made this Filipino dish. It's not like they bought it from somewhere else, like, or my mom, like whatever, or my parents taught me this. And I think that's where a lot of it came from, where it's like I'm so deeply rooted into my like the Filipino culture, but it's just more of a matter of me like acknowledging it now to the world, or just even to myself, because I feel like I've just hid it for a very long time. I don't know if I answered your question, Chris.
No, you did. And I think kind of one of the main drivers was representation, because like you said, you saw people repping it, people who you admire, and you're like, damn, like I associate and I see you as a role model, and you're repping this so hard. You're so proud to be Filipino American. Like I should be feeling the same way. I think that's kind of like what you're saying. What do you think, David?
I'm just like kind of just reflecting on like my life.
Do share, my friend. Like,
it's because my experience is so different. I think so my parents moved to the States when they were like 10 and 12, and so my parents like went to middle school, high school, college, they got advanced degrees. They were like climbing ladders in corporate America, and it's like, what's interesting is that like growing up, there was like such a disconnect between like my Filipino culture and me. I felt like American, and if anything, I identified with being like Asian American, and it was like that next step, like being even like not just Asian American, but being like Filipino American. Growing up, it wasn't like tangible to me. Not until like maybe it was because of like where I grew up. There was just not a lot of, again, like kind of what you said, Chris, like representation, or there's no, like, I didn't see people as often as maybe other people. So it's just like my experience is just so different. But I didn't really like appreciate what that was until like I went to the Philippines, which was like, I was like, what was that? I was like almost 20, more like I was 20 something. And like I went this like entire like quarter of a century not really understanding what that meant, but like it was kind of like it was like brewing, I guess, inside of me until like I finally like unlocked it. I was like, oh wow, like this is like what that actually means, like when they talk about this like in our at the dinner table, you know, like seeing those types of people. But like that just like just that whole like series of reflections while you guys were talking was I was just like it was like kind of just in and I was like whoa. It just like it just reminded me and like reinforced the importance of just like that connection. Like that connection is just so important, you know. And so like having that conversation with your grandparents, for example, you know, like what does that mean to you now, kind of looking at it in this lens, right? Because you said that that switch eventually flipped, and I think it eventually flipped for a lot of us. But then now, what does that conversation with your grandparents mean after that switch has been flipped?
Right. I should add too, like my dad made it very apparent that we go to the Philippines. We used to go a lot when we were kids. I'd skip so much school and I have to like make up, you know, but like of course when you're a little kid you don't appreciate like those things. But I think part of that, like being able to go to the Philippines at a younger age, is why I had like a conflicting issue with who I was earlier on. Right, like what you're saying, David, like it didn't really come to your realization until you're like in your 20s. But I would go to the Philippines like when I was in elementary school and middle school, and the way people perceived me, I think I felt kind of taken aback because I was just like, apparently I wasn't Filipino enough when I went there as a kid. Right. And the Philippines too, it has their own, they all have their own like prejudices and things like that. And I think it just like kind of really rubbed me in the wrong way when I was little. And so I was just like, okay, like, is this something I shouldn't be proud of? You know, but now talking about now, you know, like the conversations that I have with my grandparents, like I wish, me and my sister talked about this recently, that we wish that when my grandpa was still alive, we had more conversations about what he went through.
Oh my gosh.
Because it was just our grandparents. Like, can you imagine that? Like, that's not even like 100 years. That's 50 years ago that my grandparents went through a crazy life change, like gave up everything they knew, gave up everything they cared for, what they're familiar with, to come here for the future family they didn't even have yet.
That's so crazy.
That's like mind-blowing. I don't know if you guys watched the new like comedy special by Shane Wang.
I started it. I'm like halfway. I'm halfway through.
Oh, okay. Because there's this joke. Well, sorry, I'm gonna spoil it for you. But there's this joke he made, right? Because his parents did the same thing. He was like, I wouldn't do it though. Imagine you just leave everything behind, like everything you love and you care for, just for a couple of kids. He was like, I wouldn't do it. You know? And it's crazy to me that my grandparents and my parents thought about me before I wasn't even a thing. My dad came here, he was still single. He didn't meet my mom until he came to the United States, right? But he was just thinking about like the future of, you know, his legacy or his family after. And so now, like, as much as possible, like my grandma's about to be 80, you know. And so now I just want to talk to her about it more, and just to help her, like, also just like kind of reminisce also about like what it was, you know. And she gets really happy too these days when we do ask her about like what it was like living in the Philippines, like what she went through and all that stuff. And I think it's just building our connection to each other more. And I think that's, for me, that's very important because my grandparents are getting really old, you know. But those are stories that I want to share with my kids when I'm lecturing them about why they're spoiled. Be like, do you know what your grandma went through? But not for real though.
That's such a crazy thing to think about. Like, imagine if we had to make a decision to like pack up all our stuff right now and, you know, kind of start over. Because I mean, it reminds me of our previous guest, our friend Dexter, who literally did that. He just, his parents said, okay, make a decision. You want to go to the Philippines? And he did. And he had to start all over and kind of figure out if this was right for him. But I mean, back then, there was no technology like there is today, where you kind of know what's going to look out there, or what to kind of expect. And maybe you have more connections, you know, wherever you're going to go. I was going to ask, I don't, my history is going to might be off, but like you said, your father who came to the States on a ship, on a boat. Did he land on Angel Island? Do you know, up in NorCal? I'm wondering, just because I know a lot of Asian immigrants land there, and that'd be super cool to find out.
I have no idea.
Okay. And that's like questions that I should ask my family too. I mean, I know that, like my parents came, my dad came here with his parents, and then my mom came here through her sister, who married somebody in the military, and they kind of were able to petition her here. It's all these like different stories of how they were able to come over here. But I guess now that, we've lived this life of maybe a little bit of identity crisis, trying to figure out, where's that balance between Filipino American, and now we're having conversations with the previous generations. Like, what is the change that you think you're going to have with your kids so that they don't have to have that same dilemma that we had?
Right.
That's a good question.
You know what I mean? Like,
that's a good.
I mean, we're all married here, and if you're listening, you're not married yet. Eventually, you might have kids, so it's like it's a good conversation to have. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what's kind of going through your mind, Rachel?
That's a really good question. I never thought about it in that perspective, but like, I think for me, like I told you guys, like when I was growing up, like there was a lot of Filipinos at my school, but like there was a lot of judgment towards like who you are as a person, or even just Asian Americans in general, or minorities. We always get asked that question, where are you from? And it's like the most irking question that a person can ask you, because it's like, we're from here, but they're like, no, where are you really from? And I can't prevent that from happening to my children. But what I do hope is that through the way that we show our culture at home, or how comfortable we are with, like doing things Filipino way, that my kids can answer that question without feeling offended, or without a question, without like, I don't know, because that was me a lot. I don't know. And part of it too is like, because I would get picked on and stuff, I didn't even care to ask where I was from, like where my families were from, right? And it wasn't until I was like a lot older, and even when I met David, that like, because he's Ilocano and I'm half Ilocano, where I started to learn more about where my grandparents really came from, and I've never visited there whenever I went to the Philippines, because Pangasinan is so far. But yeah, and I don't know, I think there's so much that we can say. None of us are like parents yet, so there's so much that we can say that we think we're going to do. But I don't want to live the rest of my life like feeling like I'm out of place, or that like who I am is a problem, because you're either gonna like me or you don't. At this point, I'm like, I don't care. If you don't like me, whatever. I was fine without you anyways. So you know what I mean? So I just want like my kids to at least, I don't speak Tagalog, I don't speak Ilocano, like I know phrases, and I already have made my peace with the fact that I have no hope in trying to learn it right now anymore. But that's why me and David are so heavily on what we cook for ourselves, and what and like we have a little like side business. I'm not trying to like promo me here, but like away, girl. But we did that because I don't know if part of us just needed the validation that like what we're making is legit. Like I talked to Chris about this the other day. I'm like, we make ube bibingka, but I need to make sure other Filipinos like think like this is legit ube, or else I'm a fraud. And I'm not trying to be that. I'm trying to show. So let me like get a little personal. But when David and I first got married, I had a lot of aunties and other people question whether or not I was going to be a good enough wife. And I don't know if that stems from like the expectations that older generations have between like what a female should do and what a male should do, or like what a certain spouse should do. But it hit me really hard like in the very few months of our marriage, because I just felt like I wasn't doing good enough. And it wasn't towards David, it was more just towards like my new role as a spouse. And like I don't know, and I started like, I don't know, like after that happened, I was like, okay, I need to like master all the Filipino dishes that I love. And I don't know if I was like trying to like conform into like what other people were saying that I'm supposed to be, but through that trial I realized how much I love cooking and baking, and that part of my culture, that's both of our love languages, food. But so we made it on a thing, like every week, like, okay, what Filipino dish are we going to try to make this week? Or, you know, what dessert are we going to make? Or what recipe, like family recipe, are we going to try to tackle? But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that story, but
no, that's super cool,
man. That's cool.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I asked a question like, what do you plan to teach your kids about, find identity? I mean, one of the ways you're going to do it is through your food, through your dishes. You know what I mean? And that's so cool that you guys bond through that. And I appreciate you sharing that story where it's like you, after getting married, you're like almost questioning yourself, and that's a very, very vulnerable thing to feel. And I'm glad that you're finding yourself in that, and that you're not questioning yourself anymore, and that your husband was there to partner with you and to help you, like, okay, well, this is something you're dealing with. We're gonna do this together. You know what I mean? To find our Filipino side, I'm sorry, David, what were you gonna say?
No, I like you sparked like two thoughts in my, well, first, like one, I was gonna like take the conversation kind of in this other direction, but I also want to hear like you, Chris, like what do you plan to, or how do you plan to do that for your future kids?
Oh man, I'm gonna show them.
I didn't mean to flip it on you. Like,
no, I'm just gonna make them listen to all these podcasts.
There's this Random Ridge has this really good video where he says, like, imagine if your Filipino American parent or your Filipino parent said this, and it was like supposed to be kind of funny, but at the same time, you could tell people were in their feels in the comments, because it was like, man, like I kind of wish my parents said that.
It's like the positive Filipino parent.
Yeah, exactly. And
so good.
And I think that's what we have to do is, we can't deny that we're from two different cultures, which means that we have to take the good pieces of both, but still let them know about the things that were bad, so that they don't repeat it, or that somehow, if it's coming out of me, they can tell me, well, like, you let me know that this was kind of like a part of a culture that we want to stop at this generation. So, you know what I mean? For example, like the whole, like, comparing your children to like their peers or their cousins, right? Like, we want to stop that at the previous generation. But it might be innate in me that I might accidentally be showing it to my children, but it's like up to me and my partner, my wife, to correct these things. So I think taking the good stuff from both cultures, because both cultures are beautiful and both cultures can provide, like, so many great things, but there are bad things from both cultures that we need to recognize, and to make sure that our children are aware of it, because they might see it from not just from us, but from somewhere else, like the internet, that we need to have them recognize it when they see it, and to make the right decision when they see it. You know what I mean? Not to get too deep into that. Yeah, but that's kind of like my answer to that. But what about for you, David? We'll go right back at you.
That's a whole other podcast episode that we would talk about.
Yeah, for real. Can I defer to that? But no, I'm just kidding. So like, one thing I was really thankful for, like, that my parents did, was that I distinctly remember them telling me this when I was, I don't know, like 5th grade, 4th grade or something like that. They were like, because we used to go on like family vacations a lot, and but we would never go to the Philippines until literally I was like 22 or something. And so we would go to like all these other places around the world, and like I had a conversation with them, like, again, when I was like in 4th grade or 5th grade, and I asked them, like, or they asked me, like, do you like these, like, going to these places? And I was like, yeah. And I was like, why? I asked them just like, why do we do that? And they were like, we want you to know, like, when you read about these places in your history books, or when you see these places, when people talk about them, like in conversation or in the news or whatever, like, what they're talking about. Right. And so, like, when you read about like ancient Rome, you've seen ancient Rome before, you know what it smells like, you know what it feels like, you know what the people look like, and you've been there, and like you've experienced that, but I want to like take that, and like, so that when my kids growing up, when like their aunties or their grandparents talk about like back in the day, like in the Philippines, like on the beaches of the Philippines, like they know what that feels like. They know what that looks like. It smells like, like, I want them to know that, even though, like, yeah, maybe they don't speak the language, but, when someone's talking about like, something crazy in the Philippines, or like, the volcano, right? Like it's like, oh yeah, like I've actually been there. I've walked that volcano, you know. I want them to understand that. And I guess that's part of kind of in addition to like what you guys have said, you know. I think that's super important. And yeah, so I just that's
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm still there.
Yeah, I'm a bits of all this whole conversation. but the way I wanted to kind of steer this was kind of, Chris, you answered, you actually, or you kind of started it. I just want to kind of get maybe that ball rolling just a little bit, and explore just a little bit. But you know, talking about because Rachel, you mentioned that when you got married, there was like an expectation from other people imposed on your relationship. And I feel like, I mean, that may not be just a Filipino thing, but like that happens a lot. Right. How do we, you know, like show respect for our elders' opinions, but at the same time understand that maybe those opinions are not productive for what we're going through today? Maybe that's also another podcast you could defer to, I guess.
Just move away. That's what I did. No, I'm just playing. No. You know what, too? It's like, the thing is you have to, at least through my experience, you first have to understand what type of relationship you have with your partner. Because David and I, the way we function like at home, it's not like you're expected to do this and I'm expected to do this. There's things that like he likes to do and things that he doesn't like to do. For example, he hates doing the laundry and I don't mind it, so I do it. And I hate the dishes, so he does it. And the thing about that is like, you remove these like norms that couples are supposed to have for each other, to the point where it's like when the aunties like start, you know, gossiping or whatever, you can be like, no, well, my spouse does this and this, like, or like, you know, like people are baffled at the fact that our relationship works because they had to go through it a certain way, right? Like, you know, not everyone's like, a lot of older Filipino Americans follow like a traditional, like, the husband is expected to do this and the wife is supposed to do that. And David had a hard time with that too, like where you know, like a lot of Filipinos think like, well, the husband is supposed to only be the one to supply like the finances and stuff. So it wasn't just like I felt this way, but he also like talked to me about the pressures that he felt. And I don't know if it's kind of innate, like what Chris was saying earlier, where we just, because this is how we grew up, this is kind of subconsciously in our mind. But just us like communicating with each other about what our expectations were for each other, like really helped me to like, my anxiety kind of like died down. Nice. And so whenever some auntie would try to say something like, yeah, okay. I'm happy, bro. Yeah. You know, because at the end of the day, right, that relationship between us is what's going to impact our kids, right? Kind of like what you're saying earlier, Chris, like aunties or like other family members or relatives like in the Filipino community that are constantly like judging or comparing, unfortunately they might be going through something in their own personal life that they feel the need to compare. And so it's like, for me, it's like, I'm not going to bring that, you know, like generational trauma and toxicity into like our marriage, because then it's going to affect it negatively. And like, we're like best friends, like we don't like to hang out with other people. So I would hate to like not enjoy his company as much as I do now. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I want to hear your guys' perspective from the other side, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think the two main like biggest things you mentioned there is like communication and compromise, you know, as a married couple. Right. And, you know, you and David have that very transparent, like, okay, we feel this way, but this works for us, you know? And then I'm glad that you bring up that, let's just say it's the aunties or whatever, the generation that's like kind of judging you guys. Yeah. We love our aunties. Okay. We love our aunties. But it's like they learned that from somewhere, and then they learned that from somewhere. It's just been passing on. And I'm glad that you bring up that. Well, if they're conditioned to do that, now it's time for our generation to unlearn that, and then so we pass it on to our kids. It's not best on. So it's for me, it's I mean, you know, I would say we're lucky enough that or at least I haven't heard anything. There's things I have to learn. Like I have to learn how to like, put a nail on the wall and put a frame up. I can't call either our dads, even though I think our dads low key like appreciate when we call like, hey, can you come here and help us with the house? Because like they like to feel needed, but I still have to learn these things. I feel, or Alyssa can learn these things because she loves working on house stuff. So it's like, I'm on the same page. I think there's a lot of, as long as there's compromise and understanding, that's the key, man. How about for you, David?
Dude, I agree. It's like it's like, or I mean, to kind of maybe take it a step further, right? It's like communicating with your partner about like what's the relationship that you want, like, right? So the thing is, if the relationship that you want is the same relationship that the auntie is talking about, or that your auntie has, then you do what they did. If it's not, then you do something different. Right. And then just to kind of, again, take that a step further, same thing with just like you individually, right? Like if the life or the even just like the goals that you have are the same as the person that came before you, or someone that's like like criticizing or even just speaking over like what you're doing, then just do what they did. But if it's not, then do something different. And it's the communication with yourself at that point, that kind of affects that. So I mean, that's just kind of my thoughts on that. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Chris.
But I think it kind of ties into like our Filipino culture, because a lot of times people think like, oh, like Filipinos, they like to gossip a lot or whatever. That's kind of like one of the negative sides of like the culture or what people think of it. And like you said, like both of you guys, like we have to be the ones to decide, like, is that something I'm going to continue and teach my kids, or is it something I'm going to change? So in the same way that we kind of talked about earlier, it's like for my kids, like I want them to see what healthy relationships are like, because I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up, I wasn't really taught to talk about my feelings. I was kind of like, because like there's this thing like, oh, well, we've endured through so much, like you're fine, like you're gonna be fine. Right. It kind of ties into mental health too, like, no, you're fine, like get over it. And that's something I'm unlearning right now, like with my relationship with David also. And the same thing with him, he doesn't like talk about his feelings at all. I'll be like, are you okay? And he's like right. But that's part of like, I don't know, that was like a thing too with like my Filipino friends at school and stuff in high school too. Like when we would go through stuff, we wouldn't talk to each other about it. We'd just be like being dramatic or like chill out, you're fine, And so that's like one of the things I'm trying to unlearn that I feel like was accustomed to me as part of my upbringing.
But I think that comes from both sides of our culture too. It's just now we're here in the United States where like mental health is starting to get like the stigma starting to go away a little bit, But I mean, the resources are definitely growing, and I'm hoping on the Filipino American side that it follows, and I think it is. I think hopefully we have some guests that can share their experiences with that, and how they were able to find like help, beyond just trying to deal with it on your own, But I do think it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had among other conversations within our culture. But I guess just to kind of round this out, I do want to ask you for advice for anybody who is still blessed to have their parents and grandparents around, who were immigrants or maybe even this first gen. Like, what do you have to say to
them? First, I want younger Filipino Americans to understand that your life is so much bigger than just yourself. It's good to focus on yourself. It's good to accomplish your dreams and your goals and stuff. But just always remember, even if our parents are our biggest like criticizers, that they're always in your corner, and to just learn as much as you can from them. Because the more now that I've talked to my parents and my grandparents about what they've gone through, the more I'm learning about the things, how they were able to endure what they went through, and just also realizing that they too were like going through a time where they were also experiencing like an identity crisis with being Filipino. And I think it's just important to like embrace where they came from so that we have a better understanding of why the culture is the way it is, or why we do things a certain way.
Totally.
Because that's the only way you're going to understand, right? Like even the things that you do in your life, you have to remember, like, why do I do it this way? Right? Like Chris said, you learn it from somewhere. So understand where that root is and understand how that impacts you as a person, because I think it'll help you to be more kinder in the world that we currently live in, because what we are going through right now is just, it's insane. There's a lot of bad, and for me, like I always tell people, like it's not worth living life like just being angry all the time and being like mean or being like very self-centered. We all go through our own things, so just being open about it and being kind to everyone, I think that's kind of where the start is. And then you'll start learning more about who you are. And if you are going through that identity crisis, it's okay. We're all going through it too. And I hope you can find, people in your circle that you can share that experience, because once you let it go and you realize like who you are, like there's so much relief and so much peace that you find afterwards. And Chris and David know how much I am about that peace. So you know what I mean? And I just want that for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're Filipino or not. Because we all go through that in some shape or form. But yeah, that's just my advice.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I think, like you said, it's just there's a sense of freedom there, for sure. I know. Oh, go ahead, man.
No, I just wanted me to comment. You said the importance of also knowing what your parents went through and understanding, like, helps you understand their decision making and some of the things that they say. And once you reach that understanding, you can like have that empathy, when they at times where you may react to their reaction in a certain way, maybe you can step back and kind of empathize first, and then there's a better relationship there. But that's all I wanted to say.
No, that's perfect. So I mean, this is just the first conversation of a deeper conversation, I believe. This is something that just continues that needs to be said and restated, and I think because it hasn't happened enough, at least I know in my time. But I think that's the whole point. That's the whole point of this, like having a forum and a way for us to be able to just talk about that kind of stuff. So I mean, for anyone listening out there, if you see this posted somewhere, just know that Rachel is probably behind it, and give her a shout out when you see anything posted on social media. But now I want to give you an opportunity to plug like your bakery and all that stuff, man. First before we go. Yeah, you definitely got to do that.
Well, if you're in the Vegas area for the time being, you only got 1 year left. But you can follow us at Cadiz Kitchen. We make ube bibingka, regular bibingka. We make tupig. If you don't know what that is, get cultured. Psych. You'll enjoy it no matter what. It all comes from love. So if you can support us, that's great. No matter what. Yeah, that's all.
Nice. Awesome. Whenever I see the videos of your bibingka, I could smell it to the post.
Dude, seriously, seriously, so good.
Low-key, so like me and David be like this when we're waiting for people to pick it up. We never save ourselves any. We're like, why do we do that?
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.